I couldn't bring myself to eat. The plate in front of me sat untouched, the food growing cold as my stomach twisted into knots. My hands gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white. I wasn't hungry, not for food, at least. I was starving for the truth. Deep down, I already knew it. My wife, Callista, wasn't working late. She wasn't stuck in traffic or out with friends. She was with him. Again. The thought sent a wave of nausea rolling through me. I clenched my jaw, forcing down the bitterness rising in my throat. It wasn't just about the betrayal. It was the lies. The ease with which she looked me in the eyes, kissed me goodbye, and walked straight into another man's arms. I glanced at the clock. 7:48 p.m. I had planned every second of what would come next. This wasn't a spontaneous decision, some heat-of-the-moment reaction. No, I had thought about it for days, weeks, even. The moment I confirmed my suspicions, I knew I couldn't just sit back and let it happen. Tonight was different. Tonight, she'd come home to a reality she never expected. My fingers hovered over my phone, hesitating for a moment before I opened the app connected to our home security system. A live feed popped up on my screen, showing an empty driveway. No surprise there. She had taken her own car to dinner with him. Something about catching up with an old coworker, she had said. A bitter chuckle escaped my lips. How many times had she fed me that excuse? I tapped another button on my phone, activating the smart locks. With a soft click, every door in the house locked simultaneously. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling a slow, measured breath. Now, all I had to do was wait. The seconds ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. My heart pounded in my chest, but I wasn't nervous. If anything, I felt calm, as if a weight I had been carrying for months was finally about to be lifted. Then, at precisely 9:16 p.m., my phone rang. Callista. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering, keeping my voice steady. Hey, babe, she said, her tone light, almost too casual. Something's wrong with the front door? I think the lock's jammed or something. Can you open it from inside? I closed my eyes for a beat, picturing her standing on the porch, fumbling with her keys. She probably thought she could just waltz back in, slip into bed beside me, and pretend nothing had happened. Not tonight. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor as I walked to the window. Pulling back the curtain just an inch, I caught a glimpse of her standing under the porch light. Her arms were crossed, her phone pressed to her ear, and then I saw him. A few feet behind her, a man lingered near the curb. His hands were in his pockets, his stance hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he should stay or leave. So, she hadn't even waited until he was out of sight before calling me. A hollow laugh escaped my lips, but I quickly covered it. The lock isn't jammed, Callista, I said, my voice calm, almost too calm. I changed it. Silence. Then, a nervous chuckle from her end. Wait, what? You heard me, I said. Your key doesn't work because that's not your home anymore. I watched as her body tensed, the realization settling in. She turned slightly, glancing toward the man at the curb. Panic flickered across her face. Are you joking? She asked, her voice tighter now. Because if this is some kind of... It's not a joke, Callista. I cut in, my patience razor thin. I know where you've been. I know what you've been doing. And I'm done. She sucked in a breath. We can talk about this inside. Just let me in, okay? We can figure this out. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. No, Callista. You figured it out when you chose him. I watched as she whirled around, her face a mask of panic. The man at the curb took a step forward, his expression uncertain. Callista, he called. She spun back to the door, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. Please, we don't have to do this like this. Let me in, and we can talk. But I had already made up my mind. Goodbye, Callista. And with that, I hung up. I stood at the window for a moment longer, watching as she tried the lock again and again, frustration giving way to panic. Eventually, she turned and stalked toward the curb, toward him, toward the life she had chosen. I let the curtain fall back into place and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. The silence that followed was deafening. Even with my phone back on the table, screen dark, her voice still rang in my ears. The desperation, the panic, it was almost satisfying. Almost. But satisfaction wasn't what I felt. I felt empty. I stared at the living room, the dim glow of the lamp, the framed photos on the wall, the furniture we picked out together. It all felt like a museum now, A collection of things from a life that no longer existed. A life she had destroyed. I walked over to the mantel, my eyes landing on a picture of us from 3 years ago. We were on vacation, standing in front of a lighthouse in Maine. She was clinging to my arm, laughing at something I had said. I used to think that was real, that we were real. Now I knew better. With a quiet sigh, I grabbed the frame and flipped it over. The glass clinked softly as I pried off the back and slid the photo out. Then, without hesitation, I tore it straight down the middle. The pieces fluttered to the floor. A sharp knock at the front door snapped me back to the present. I knew it was her before she even spoke. "Ronan," she called, her voice muffled through the wood. "Please, just open the door. Just for a second." Ronan. My name. The same name she had probably whispered to herself when she slipped her ring off before meeting him. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. "Go home, Callista," I said, loud enough for her to hear. "This is my home," she snapped, her voice rising. "You don't get to do this. You can't just shut me out like this." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Pretty sure that's exactly what I can do." A pause. Then, softer. "I messed up, okay? But we can fix this. Fix this." As if she had knocked over a glass of water, and I just needed to grab a towel. "Go home," I repeated, my voice firm. "Where am I supposed to go?" she cried, her voice cracking. I hesitated, just for a second. Not because I cared about her answer, but because the truth of it hit me. She really had nowhere to go. She had spent so much time sneaking around, living a double life, that she had burned every bridge without even realizing it. A long silence followed. Then, her voice, barely above a whisper. "I love you." My chest tightened. Not with longing, not with regret, but with something closer to anger. She loved me? That wasn't love. Love wasn't lying to my face. Love wasn't sneaking out at night, making excuses, letting another man hold her the way I had. Love wasn't this. I stepped closer to the door, resting my hand on the wood. I could hear her breathing on the other side, unsteady, waiting. Finally, I spoke. "No, Callista. You loved yourself. And now, you can love him." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the cold. Let her feel what it was like to be on the outside. I had been there for months. I sat down on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of her knocking. It wasn't loud anymore. No more desperate banging or yelling my name. It was softer now, tentative, pleading. I closed my eyes. I could still see her face in my mind, the way her lips trembled when I told her she wasn't coming back inside. Part of me wanted to feel something for her. Anger, satisfaction, maybe even pity. But I felt nothing. She had already taken everything from me, piece by piece, long before tonight. The knocking stopped. I exhaled slowly, waiting, listening for any movement outside. A minute passed, then 2. Finally, I stood up and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain just a fraction. She was still there, standing by the porch railing, hugging herself against the cold. Her phone was pressed to her ear, her free hand gesturing as she spoke. And then, just like before, my eyes drifted past her, to him. The same man from earlier. He was still lingering by the curb, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I could see the way Callista glanced over her shoulder at him, her face tight with frustration. Was she asking for a ride? Was she trying to convince him that she still had control of the situation? A bitter laugh crawled up my throat. I had spent so long wondering how she could do this to me. How she could look me in the eyes and pretend that nothing had changed. How she could crawl into our bed after being with someone else. But now, I realized the truth. She wasn't special. She wasn't some master manipulator, weaving an elaborate web of lies. She wasn't a tragic, conflicted woman caught between two loves. She was just a coward. And cowards always got sloppy. I let the curtain fall back into place and walked to the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water. My hands were steady now. No shaking. No hesitation. For the first time in months, I was done. I took a sip, relishing the coolness as it ran down my throat. I was already thinking about what came next, what my life would look like after this. Because this, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering where I went wrong, was over. Then, my phone vibrated. I looked down at the screen. Callista. Of course. I let it ring. She tried again. Then again. Finally, after the 4th call, I answered. "Ronan," she said immediately, her voice small. "I don't have anywhere to go. I leaned against the counter, watching the seconds tick by on the microwave clock. Not my problem. Please, she continued when I didn't respond. Can't we just talk inside? I sighed through my nose. We already talked. You threw me out, she snapped, anger breaking through her voice. I deserve a chance to explain. I let out a slow chuckle. You deserve a chance? Like I deserved honesty. Silence. I could hear her breathing, shaky and uneven. You don't understand, she whispered. I clenched my jaw. No, you don't understand, Callista. I know everything. I know about the business trips. I know about the long lunches. I know about him. So tell me, what exactly do I need to hear that I don't already know? More silence. Then, softer. I never meant to hurt you. I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. How many times had I heard that phrase? How many movies? How many stories? How many desperate cheaters trying to cover their own guilt with empty words? I almost wanted to laugh. That's the thing, Callista, I said quietly. You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed us. I heard a choked breath on the other end of the line. Then, her voice, almost childlike. I don't know what to do. For the briefest moment, something twisted inside me. A shadow of the man who used to love her. The man who, not too long ago, would have wanted to fix things. But that man was gone. I set my glass down and turned toward the front door. Through the peephole, I could see her standing there, arms wrapped around herself. I exhaled, slow and steady. You'll figure it out, I said, my voice firm. But not here. Not with me. And then, without another word, I hung up. I stood there for a moment, my heart beating evenly in my chest. I waited for another knock, another plea, another excuse. But it never came. Instead, I watched as she lowered her phone, blinking back whatever emotion she had left. Then, slowly, she turned and walked toward him. He didn't move at first, almost unsure of what to do. Then, reluctantly, he reached for the car door and opened it. Callista hesitated. Not because she didn't want to go with him, but because, for the first time, she had no other choice. She had played her hand, and she had lost. The car door shut. The engine roared to life. And just like that, they were gone. I stood there in the quiet of my home, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. This wasn't how I expected my life to turn out. But maybe, just maybe, it was exactly how it was meant to. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that felt unnatural, like the world had been put on mute. I stood in the middle of the living room, hands in my pockets, staring at the door where Callista had stood just minutes ago. The echoes of her voice, her pleading, her desperation still lingered in the air. But she was gone now. Gone with him. The man she had thrown away everything for. I should have felt triumphant. Victorious. She had begged me to let her in, to give her another chance, and I had done the one thing she never expected. I said no. But instead of victory, all I felt was an odd sense of weightlessness. Like I had been carrying a crushing burden for so long that now, without it, I didn't know how to stand. I exhaled slowly and walked toward the kitchen, my bare feet silent against the hardwood floors. Everything was exactly as she had left it that morning. Her coffee cup sat on the counter, half drunk. Her sweater was draped over the back of a chair. A grocery list scribbled in her handwriting was pinned to the fridge. It was like she was still here. Like some part of her was lingering, haunting the home we had built together. But that's the thing about ghosts. They weren't real. I grabbed the coffee cup and tossed it into the sink. The sweater went into the trash. Then, I walked to the fridge, ripped the grocery list off, and crumpled it in my fist. It felt good. Not in a petty way, just final. She had made her choices. And now, I was making mine. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, my mind racing. What now? I had been so focused on getting to this moment, on taking back control, that I hadn't thought much about what came next. I glanced at my phone, expecting another call, another message. Nothing. She knew. She knew I wasn't going to budge. I took a deep breath and let my eyes wander the kitchen, the cabinets, the countertops. It all felt different now. Like this wasn't my home anymore, but some unfamiliar space that had been tainted by her lies. I needed to get out of here. For the past few months, I had been the one waiting at home. The one sitting alone while she was out, doing God knows what with God knows who. Not anymore. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, locking it behind me. The night air was crisp, carrying the distant hum of traffic from the main road. I slid into my car, gripping the wheel for a moment before finally starting the engine. I didn't have a destination. I just needed to drive. The streetlights flickered past as I pulled onto the highway, my thoughts racing just as fast as the road beneath me. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching my own life play out from the outside. I had spent years in our routine. Sunday morning coffee runs. Friday night takeout. Inside jokes only we understood. A life built on familiarity, comfort, trust. And now? Now, it was just me. The weight of that realization settled deep in my chest, but it wasn't as heavy as I expected. If anything, it was liberating. I had spent so much time wondering if I had done something wrong, if I had missed the signs, if I had failed her in some way. But tonight had confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't about me. It never was. Callista had chosen her path, thinking she could have it all, her perfect husband waiting at home, and her secret life on the side. She had assumed I'd be too weak to do anything about it. She was wrong. A small, tired smile tugged at the corner of my lips as I pulled into an all-night diner just off the highway. It was a place I hadn't been to in years, since before we were married, back when I used to take long drives just to clear my head. I parked and stepped out, the neon lights buzzing overhead as I pushed open the glass door. The smell of coffee and sizzling bacon wrapped around me like a warm blanket. The place was mostly empty, just a few scattered customers sitting alone in booths. A waitress in her late 50s gave me a tired, but kind smile as I slid into a booth by the window. "What can I get you, hon?" she asked, pulling out her notepad. I hesitated, then let out a small breath. "Just coffee." She nodded and walked off, leaving me to stare out at the empty parking lot. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was no one waiting for me. No texts to check. No lies to decipher. Just silence. And somehow, for the first time in months, that silence didn't feel lonely. It felt like peace. Steam curled from the cup in front of me, the scent of fresh coffee filling the air. I wrapped my hands around it, letting the warmth seep into my skin. Across the diner, the waitress leaned against the counter, chatting idly with the cook, her voice a quiet hum beneath the soft clatter of dishes. I exhaled slowly, staring into the dark liquid. I should have felt angry. That was what I had been expecting. Rage, resentment, some deep, burning fury over what Callista had done. But instead, all I felt was this strange, almost eerie calm. Like my body had finally caught up with what my mind had known for weeks. It was over. The thought echoed in my head, as surreal as it was freeing. No more waiting up at night. No more analyzing her words, looking for hidden meanings. No more gut-wrenching suspicion clawing at my insides. For the first time in a long time, my life was mine again. I picked up the cup and took a sip, letting the bitterness ground me in the moment. Through the window, the neon diner sign flickered against the dark sky. And then, a vibration in my pocket. I sighed, already knowing who it was before I even glanced at the screen. Callista. The first few calls, I had ignored. But this time, something in me wanted to pick up. Not to argue, not to listen to whatever excuse she had rehearsed, but to end it properly. I set my cup down, took a deep breath, and answered. Silence. For a second, I thought maybe she had changed her mind, that she had panicked and hung up. But then, a shaky breath on the other end. Ronan. Her voice was hoarse, like she had been crying. Or screaming. Maybe both. I leaned back in the booth, keeping my own voice steady. What do you want, Callista? A pause. Then, softer, I don't know. I let out a slow, humorless chuckle. That's the first honest thing you've said to me in a while. She inhaled sharply, like the words had physically struck her. I know I messed up, okay? She stopped herself, voice trembling. I don't know why I did it. Lies. I shook my head, rubbing a hand over my jaw. You do know. You just don't want to admit it. You wanted the thrill, the attention, the rush of getting away with it. You wanted both lives, and you thought I'd never catch on. That's not true, she whispered. I love you, Ronan. I stiffened. Not because I believed her, but because she believed it. That was the worst part of it all. In her mind, she probably did love me. Or at least, she thought she did. But real love wasn't selfish. Real love didn't thrive in deception. Real love wasn't sneaking around behind your partner's back and only feeling guilty once you got caught. I don't think you even know what love is, Callista, I said, my voice quieter now. Because if you did, you wouldn't have done this. A shaky breath. I didn't mean to hurt you. I closed my eyes. But you did. And you kept doing it. Over and over. You chose to. More silence. Then, her voice, barely a whisper. What happens now? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. I thought about all the times I had sat at this very booth years ago, back when life had felt simple. Before her. Before the weight of us. And I realized I didn't owe her an answer. Not anymore. That's not my problem, I said, my voice firm. It's yours. Another sharp inhale from her end. So that's it. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting the words settle in my chest. Then, finally, I nodded. Yeah, I said. That's it. I hung up before she could say another word. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at my phone. No more ringing. No more buzzing. Just silence. And for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like a beginning. I sat there for a long time, my phone resting face down on the table, the glow of the neon sign outside flickering in the window's reflection. The waitress came by, refilled my coffee without a word, and gave me a knowing look. The kind people give when they see something is off but don't want to pry. I appreciated that. I wasn't ready to talk. Not to strangers, not to anyone. Because for the first time in years, there was no we. No us. Just me. And I didn't even know what that meant anymore. The thought settled deep in my chest, a strange weight pressing against my ribs. My life had been so intertwined with Callista's for so long that now, without her, it felt like someone had ripped out a piece of my identity and left a gaping hole behind. But wasn't that the point? She had taken so much from me already. The trust. The security. The certainty of knowing the person sleeping beside me was truly mine. I was done letting her take more. I drained the last of my coffee and slid a few bills onto the table, nodding at the waitress as I stood. My legs felt heavier than before, but my chest? My chest felt lighter. The drive home was quiet. No music. No radio. Just the steady hum of the tires on the road and the rhythmic flicker of streetlights passing overhead. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house looked different. It was the same house I had left, same porch light glowing dimly in the darkness. But now it felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. Someone I used to be. I sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. The echoes of the night still clung to the air, the sight of Callista standing on the porch, her voice cracking as she begged me to let her in. The image of him waiting by the curb, his posture stiff, unsure whether to leave or stay. I had made my choice. And now, I had to live with it. I stepped out and made my way up the front steps. The locks had already been changed, but I hesitated before turning the key, because once I did, it was real. Once I walked through that door, I was officially stepping into the first night of my new life. No more pretending. No more waiting for her to come home. Just me. I took a breath and turned the key. The door swung open with a soft creak, revealing the same living room I had left hours earlier. The only difference? The absence of her. Her shoes weren't by the door. Her purse wasn't on the counter. The faint traces of her perfume didn't linger in the air. For the first time in years, I was truly, undeniably alone. And instead of fear, instead of sorrow, instead of crushing regret, I felt peace. I locked the door behind me, tossing my keys onto the counter before making my way through the house. I didn't turn on any lights. I didn't need to. I had walked this path 1,000 times before. Through the hallway, past the kitchen, into the bedroom. The bed was still made, untouched from the night before. I stared at it for a long moment before finally sitting down, rubbing a hand over my face. A part of me expected to feel something, some deep sadness, some hollow ache. But I didn't. Because this silence, this solitude, this moment of absolute clarity was exactly what I needed. I wasn't just closing a chapter. I was starting a new one. And for the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't afraid. Morning came slowly. I hadn't set an alarm, but the soft glow of sunlight creeping through the blinds pulled me from sleep. For a moment, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the quiet settle deep in my bones. It was the first time in years I had woken up without Callista beside me. And yet, I didn't feel the emptiness I had expected. No heavy sadness. No aching loss. Just clarity. I rolled onto my side, my eyes landing on the empty space where she used to sleep. The sheets were undisturbed, smooth and untouched. She used to leave them messy, always kicking them off in the middle of the night, tangling herself up until I had to pull them back into place. I used to find it endearing. Now, I wondered how many times she had kicked those sheets off after coming home from him. How many nights had I laid beside her, completely unaware that she had spent her evening in another man's bed. The thought should have made me sick. But instead, it only solidified one thing. She was gone. And she wasn't coming back. I showered longer than usual, letting the scalding water wash away the remnants of the night before. When I stepped out, I caught my reflection in the mirror, eyes sharper, shoulders less tense. For the first time in months, I looked like myself again. It was a strange realization. When you're in the middle of betrayal, drowning in doubt and second-guessing everything you thought you knew, you forget who you are. You become a version of yourself, one built on suspicion, paranoia, and quiet suffering. I wasn't that man anymore. I wouldn't be him ever again. I pulled on a clean shirt, ran a hand through my damp hair, and stepped into the kitchen. The house felt different in the daylight. Less haunted. More mine. I made coffee. Black. No sugar. No cream. She used to tease me about that, said it made me seem old. I smiled to myself, taking a slow sip. It tasted better than it ever had before. And maybe that was the key. Maybe everything tasted better when it wasn't tainted by lies. By noon, I was standing in front of the closet, staring at her clothes. Dresses, blouses, jackets, all lined up neatly, as if she had every intention of coming back for them. I exhaled slowly, running my fingers along the fabric. These weren't just clothes. They were reminders of who she was, of who I thought she was, of the life we had built together, only for her to burn it to the ground. I grabbed the first dress off the hanger and tossed it onto the bed. Then another, and another. By the time I was done, a mountain of her belongings sat in front of me. This was the final step, the last thing tethering me to her. I picked up my phone and typed out a message. Your things will be in trash bags on the porch. Pick them up by tonight, or they're gone. I didn't wait for a reply. Didn't need one. Because this wasn't about her anymore. This was about me. Reclaiming my space. Reclaiming my life. Reclaiming myself. And for the first time since this all began, I felt like I was finally free. I didn't wait for her to respond. I didn't need to. By the time evening rolled around, her things were packed up and waiting on the porch. I didn't sift through them, didn't hold on to anything that might make me second-guess my decision. This wasn't about reminiscing. This was about moving forward. I sat on the couch, sipping my coffee, as the last light of day faded beyond the trees. The house was completely silent, but for the first time, it wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. An hour later, my phone vibrated. I already knew who it was before I looked. Callista, I'll be there soon. No apology. No attempt at an excuse. Just a cold, transactional statement. It didn't bother me the way it would have before. I set my phone down and exhaled, stepping onto the porch just as a car pulled up. The headlights washed over the bags at my feet, illuminating the last remnants of our life together. The passenger door swung open, and there she was. Callista. She hesitated, as if unsure whether to step forward or stay in the car. I could see him in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the wheel, his expression unreadable. They deserved each other. She finally moved, walking toward me, her arms crossed tightly against her chest. So that's it, she asked, her voice carefully neutral. This is how we end? I looked at her for a long moment. She looked different. Or maybe I did. Maybe now, without the weight of us, I could finally see her for who she really was. Or maybe, for who she had always been. I nodded. Yeah, Callista. This is how we end. A flicker of something crossed her face, anger, regret, maybe even sadness. But it didn't matter. Not anymore. She stared at me for a second longer, then bent down to grab the bags. I didn't help. I wasn't her husband anymore. That wasn't my role. And then, just like that, she was gone. The car backed out of the driveway, its red taillights disappearing into the night. I watched until the darkness swallowed them whole. Then, I turned and walked back inside, locking the door behind me. I had expected to feel something pain, relief, maybe even a twinge of nostalgia. But all I felt was light. Like I had been carrying something too heavy for too long, and now, suddenly, it was gone. And in its place? Possibility. For the first time in years, my future wasn't tied to someone else's choices. I wasn't sitting at home, waiting for someone who had already made the decision to leave me behind. I was free. I grabbed my keys and walked outside, breathing in the crisp night air. There was a whole world waiting for me. A whole life beyond this moment. And I was finally ready to live it. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't looking back.